Just to pique your interest on the subject, first of all, you're a busy teacher. You've got a lot going on, a lot to cover. Red River War has lots and lots of documentation, some fantastic books, new books, old books, journal articles, terrific visuals, whether they're contemporary pictures from the time period or modern recreations. As we were talking about earlier before you came on, the regional museums, whether it's Frontier Texas in Abilene or Panhandle Plains Museum in Lubbock, all around the area, there are terrific museums that tell the story of the Red River War, and just lots and lots of resources. Online resources are terrific for this. And, we're all in a hurry to get our lessons together. There's no shame in looking at the online materials. I see a few mistakes here and there once in a while, but by and large, they're very, very good. And so it's a very rich subject if you're looking for material. I also like it because you can easily combine the secondary and primary historical sources with enriching information from archaeology, ethnology, geography, what we call ethnogeography, which is sort of the Indian view of the landscape. That's all been documented, and it complements the historical sources in a very colorful way, which I think is really interesting to students. I know I try and do that in my college courses, and it'd be great, if you can do that as well. The Red River War is nice because it's modular. There were like 20 different battles, but there are many different episodes, many different personalities, and you can break it into sections to digest, have students specialize in little segments of it. You can look before it to the preceding events and the contributing factors to better understand, for example, the annihilation of the buffalo. There are a lot of different viewpoints from the participant observation, vantage. You've got the military officers, these generally ex-Civil War veterans, West Point trained, pretty remarkable people in their own right. You have the enlisted men, often recent Irish and German immigrants or immigrants from elsewhere in Europe, the African-American buffalo soldiers, the warriors among the native tribes, but also their families, their children, their wives, their parents. Hispanic traders out of New Mexico, the Comancheros, some of whom are taken prisoner by the US Army to divulge the whereabouts of the Indians. And captives, non-Indians held by the Indian tribes as hostages or adoptees that play a part in a lot of the events. The German sisters, for example, who were rescued in one of the battles that we're going to talk about. I think the Red River War is good for showing the complexity of Native identity. We have these tribes that we'll look at in more detail, but they're quite distinct. And they have different motivations, different backgrounds, different ways of making a living. And some work with the settlers and some work against the settlers. And finally, the Red River War was a decisive series of battles. It took 150 years to resolve the conflicts between European settlers and the Native Americans in Texas. And this 5-year period brings a rapid conclusion to that long lingering issue. But it's decisive. And so you can talk about manifest destiny, the winning of the West, how reservations were set up, why we have the current state constitution. I know that's a Tex issue that is adopted right after the Red River War is settled. And lots of before and after contrasts are enabled once you understand the Red River War. Now I say this, this pertains to the Southern Plains. The conflicts between settlers and the Army and Indians on the Northern Plains persists until 1890, but it's settled in Texas by 1875. The essential question that I'd like to share with you today and ask you to use as kind of a an outline for our talk is, it's a pedagogical question. It's not a factual question. But as a teacher, how can oral history, geography, and archaeology enliven the study of Indian conflict in Texas? So this question is our broad question, but I know that really the knowledge and skills that you are most interested in terms of the nuts and bolts of your everyday teaching emanate from the Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills. Well, the Red River War maps on beautifully to item 6A in the 7th grade. It's custom made for that subject. Identify significant individuals and factors leading to expansion of the Texas frontier, the effects of expansion on American Indians, the Buffalo Soldiers, and Quanah Parker. Those are the stars of the story today. So it's the perfect vehicle for satisfying item 6A. But elsewhere in the 7th grade curriculum, there are also opportunities to use this material. You're asked to have the students acquainted with major eras. I would say that this is a segment of a major era. They're asked to contrast purposes and methods of settlement. There's certainly a contrast between the way the United States Army affects the protection of the settlers in Texas compared to other regimes. We have a very heavy geography component that I'd like to emphasize today. Geography is one of the components in text. And cultural heritage maintenance and adaptation. How did the Indians persist with some of their traditions and modify their cultures and societies to adjust to the new nation? Those are issues that are broached toward the end of the Red River War. When we get to high school, of course, the text standards for history really begin in 1877. So I would set my sights on something like the social studies research methods segment, where they ask students to use information from sources that take into account multiple perspectives, to investigate and analyze multiple historical and contemporary viewpoints within and across cultures. I think the Red River War offers high school students a lot of opportunities in those kinds of areas. But getting back to the essential question of oral history and geography, this interest comes to me by virtue of my own research. So I publish in history journals sometimes, but I'm trained as a cultural anthropologist, and I've been working with Comanche people in Southwest Oklahoma for almost 40 years. And I'll click through these slides just really quickly. I do participant observation in interviewing the elders in an effort to record their tribal traditions. And one of the things that keeps coming up is the importance of their viewpoint, which has been transmitted largely through stories, oral history. And another thing that they emphasize a lot is appreciating the landscape and how the landscape tells its own story about their approaches to their strategies for survival, why they felt so rooted in the land that we call Texas today, and so forth. So my perspective is influenced, I think, by the Comanche perspective, and I enjoy taking that and trying to match that up to the official records that are perhaps a little bit more available to us. For Indian people and non-Indians alike, the Red River War was a traumatic experience, but it was also a great adventure. And they were glorious times as well. And I know that the Comanche people, for all the hardship they endured, they think about the heroic aspects of this conflict, much in the way that those aspects were celebrated by non-Indians. Here we have this wonderful painting by Frederick Remington, which is in the Museum of Modern Art in New York, and it depicts a cavalry charge on the Southern Plains. This kind of imagery is very helpful because it triggers, I think, in most of us, some association with our notions of Western history, cultivated through watching movies and reading books as kids, television shows. So most of your students are going to have some idea about what this was like, at least in a superficial way, but that's a great foundation for getting into more and more interesting detail. So let's look at how this conflict really got underway. And some of you are probably real frontier history buffs, but I'm gonna assume that maybe you're not, so that I can explain this as deeply as possible in a short period of time. But when Texas became a state in 1845, the federal government assumed responsibility, for better or worse, for the safety of settlers on the frontier in Texas, and also for the welfare of the native peoples that lived there. Well, in those early days, they were preoccupied with the US-Mexican War, but by 1849, they started to attack this issue by creating a line of forts. It's called the First Federal Line. And they built a fort, they built Fort Worth in Fort Worth, naturally. They built Fort Croghan in Burnet, Fort Martin Scott in Fredericksburg, Fort Inge in Uvalde. I realize this map is very small, but these first installations are set up a line like this in 1849. Well, that line became obsolete almost immediately because the settlers were moving northwest. So by 1851 or 1852, they were building a second federal line a little further out, Fort Mason in Mason, Texas, for example. And then as this process proceeds, it becomes less and less a line. It becomes kind of sloppy, and there are installations further and further out on the plains. But the idea was to set up some kind of border that was patrolled by the military to keep down the conflict between settlers and Indians. And this system actually worked pretty well for a good while. In fact, in the mid-1850s, there were several years of virtual peace in Texas. It wasn't a perfect system. There were depredations and settlers' responses, but it wasn't really as bad as it had been earlier and as bad as it got later. A lot of this patrolling by the military caused many of the Indians to divert their energies into Mexico. And they really ravaged Mexico in the 1850s, but the Army pretty much looked the other way as they were traveling down and back. They were supposed to intercept them. Sometimes they did, but they didn't do a very strong job. But they did a good job of basically keeping peace in the area. The Indians in the central part of the state, you can see, were pretty much surrounded by forts before the Civil War. And they were put on reservations first in Texas and then moved to Southwest Oklahoma. So as the Civil War approaches, you have the High Plains tribes still wild and independent, raiding into Mexico, but then going up into the Panhandle, which is their home territory, where they feel invulnerable because they're so far away from the settlements and from the Army patrols. Well, these posts on the frontier were abandoned when the Civil War broke out. The federal troops withdrew from Texas, and the Confederates really didn't have the resources to man those troops, man those forts rather. And so the conflict really escalated in the early 1860s, and it became a big problem that the federal government decided it had to solve once the war was over. So with the end of the Civil War, the federal government decides to really address this problem in Texas and the Southern Plains. It forms an Indian Peace Commission, which in turn proposes a council at Medicine Lodge Creek in Kansas in October of 1867. And it's a week-long event. The treaty really consists of 4 agreements. They're separate treaties with the Comanches, Kiowas, Kiowa Apaches, and Cheyennes, the main southern tribes that are still at large. And these tribes under these treaties agree to restrict their movements to a relatively small portion of their former territories. And a reservation is set up for each one. This is a picture of the treaty that the Cheyenne signed. And if you look, you can see that signing for President Andrew Johnson is the Secretary of State, William Seward, who is more famous for purchasing Alaska. So Seward's icebox, we all know that story. Well, it's interesting to me that he was also interested in the Southern Plains and had a role basically in the formation of 2 of our biggest states, both Alaska and Texas. So to anchor the effort in settling these Southern Plains tribes, Fort Sill, Oklahoma is established in 1869. And this is the place where the Army is going to be stationed to oversee the Indians coming in and settling on their reservations. And Fort Sill, which is located here where I'm pointing in southwest Oklahoma, really is part of a larger expansion of the federal forts after the Civil War. They amped this up even more and get closer to the Panhandle, Fort Concho, Fort Griffin, and so forth. Well, at the Medicine Lodge Council, the representative for the Comanches was a gentleman named Baru Asumara, 10 Bears. He was a Yamparika chief. The Yamparika, or root eaters, were one of the big divisions of the northern Comanches. Well, 10 Bears made a famous speech at the Medicine Lodge Council. It's a fantastic example of Indian oratory, where he explains to everyone why the Comanches must remain wild and free. And after making that speech, he then signs the treaty. Well, he didn't speak for all the Comanches, let alone all the Yamparikas. And so a number of Indians either came to the reservation very quickly and got discouraged because the rations that were supposed to be there were not as robust as they were supposed to be, or they just never came in. The groups we're talking about include the northern Comanches, bands like Yamparika, the Coatsadeka, or buffalo eaters, and the Quahatis, or antelopes. Their allies, the Kiowas. Comanches and Kiowas have been allies since 1790. A small group of Apaches that's affiliated with the Kiowas, called the Kiowa Apaches or Plains Apaches, are also part of this group. In 1840, the Comanches and Kiowas joined forces with the Cheyennes and Arapahoes. Now, the Cheyennes are a Central Plains tribe, originally from the area around Nebraska. With the thrust of westward settlement, they split into 2 separate groups, Northern Cheyennes, Southern Cheyennes. The Northern Cheyennes affiliate with the Sioux and fight up there until 1890. The Southern Cheyennes are the ones we're talking about here, allied with the Comanches. And as the Comanches have Kiowas as their allies, the Cheyennes have a smaller group called the Arapahoes that is also split into northern and southern sections and is allied with the Cheyennes. These are the High Plains tribes, the classic horse Indians, raiding long distance and occupying the Llano Estacado and the canyons on its edge. We also have lots of other Indian people that are involved on the side of the United States Army. Delaware Scouts, originally from New Jersey, have a heavy presence in Texas, important influence in Texas history, always as mediators and peacemakers when they can be. The Tonkawas, a very small tribe from central Texas that was attacked incessantly by the Comanches and is eager for revenge, so they scout against them. Seminoles from Florida, including Black Freemen, who serve as scouts for the Army, and some Southern Comanches of the Penatoka or Honey Eater group, those of the Texas Hill Country who have become peaceful. Some of them also scout for the Army, and you'll see them mentioned in some of our sources. So there's a real great diversity of Indian peoples in different backgrounds that are involved here. Well, as I said, the rations at Fort Sill were inadequate. There was a lot of corruption. Farming did not appeal to the nomadic Comanches. That was the remedy for their subsistence. There were various intrusions of whites into the territory that had been promised to the Indians. It wasn't adequately policed by the Army, and so a lot of Indians stayed away from the reservation. And it fell to Colonel Randall Mackenzie to launch patrols and persuade or force the Indians to the reservations. Mackenzie leads this initial effort with cavalry and infantry. The Indians call him Bad Hand because his part of his hand was blown away in the Civil War. He's a remarkable soldier, a soldier's soldier, extremely tough, loved and hated by his men at the same time, but a very interesting personality. He starts in 1871, which for me is the beginning of the Red River War. A lot of people define the Red River War as beginning in 1874 and it's over the following spring, but really all of these conflicts are of one piece, and I think you have to look at them all to understand them. So in the fall, and you'll notice a lot of these battles happen in the fall because the Army figured out that they could catch the Indians preparing for the winter in large groups by, camping out in canyons, remote canyons, getting ready where there's wood and water to just survive through the winter. And they were vulnerable at that time. And then if you defeated them in the fall, they faced a harsh winter, and that would bring about their surrender, it was thought. The first battle then is the Battle of Blanco Canyon in October of 1871. Mackenzie goes after Coatzadeca and Quahatis under Quanah Parker. They had attacked a wagon train called the Warren Wagon Train. As the cavalry approaches the canyon, Quanah's warriors ride through them. They sweep through and stampede away 66 horses. The next day, a large Indian party sweeps down the canyon to attack the cavalry, and they're held off by 5 soldiers under Lieutenant R.G. Carter. His memoirs are in the readings that I've suggested you look at. He was awarded the Medal of Honor for this exploit, one of many, many medals of honors awarded in the Red River Wars. Mackenzie's larger force then pursued the Indians back up the canyon, destroying hundreds of lodges. But the Indians make it up onto the flat top of the Llano Estacado. They scramble up the sides of the canyon. The women and children get away, and the men fire down on the cavalry. As Mackenzie tries to attack them, a blue norther hits, and he has to turn back because of the weather. He heads south out of the mouth of the canyon under continued sniper fire. He himself is wounded, one of 5 or 6 wounds that Mackenzie endures. Only a few people are killed. 2 Comanches, maybe more. 1 trooper is killed. So very low casualties, but a lot of action. And from the Army standpoint, a mixed success at best. They've kind of tormented the Indians and broken up their camp, but they also lost their horses, and it was not a conclusive battle. In these characteristics, it's a very typical battle for the Red River War. Low casualties, not a lot of decisive activity. Well, I'm reminded here of those movie reviews where they say that the landscape is a character in the story. And certainly that's the case in the Red River War. The landscape really helps you understand the story. I find topographic maps to be excellent for this. I mean, they're great to engage students with. Here we're looking at Lubbock, and east of Lubbock is Blanco Canyon running up here. And you can see it's one of several indentations in the face of the Llano Estacado, all the way up along the eastern face. And these are the places where the Indians were camping. So a lot of the battles have the same character. They go up into these areas. Now, if you can see on the map, it's maybe a little small, but the stream there is called White River. It is a tributary of the Brazos. It's one of the arms of the Brazos River. White River in English comes from Blanco in Spanish, Blanco Canyon. And that in turn comes from the Comanche name, Tosohonavi, which means white river or white canyon. The word canyon and river are the same in Comanche because that's kind of obvious. It's the same kind of formation because of the white limestone sides. So this is one of many instances where our place names are of Indian derivation, but you wouldn't necessarily know it. And it's an interesting exercise to work with students to find other Comanche names in the region, and you can do this, they're documented, that record their presence. It's little known that these places have Comanche names. The following year, Mackenzie tries the same thing again in late September of 1872. This up north of northeast, or pretty much east of Amarillo, so further north, the Battle of McClellan Creek, also known as the Battle of the North Fork of the Red River. And I call this the first battle here because there was another engagement a few years later on that creek. So the names change and the dates are not always the same. So Mackenzie reports that his attack occurred on the 29th. Atokney, the Comanche historian, says the engagement happened on the 24th of September. We'll go with Mackenzie's number here, his date. But this is the site of the battle that you're reading about in the Atokney oral histories, when the Indians are, again, they're pinned in a canyon. And in this case, Mackenzie comes up on a very, very large encampment under the Coatzateca chief Maui, or Shaking Hand, who ironically is over by Fort Sill, engaged in peace talks when his people are attacked. Mackenzie marches through with 222 soldiers and 9 Tonkawa scouts and lays siege to the whole valley. 260 or more Indian lodges are burned. All their supplies are destroyed. 23 Comanches are killed at least, and 130 women and children are rounded up and taken as hostage, taken prisoner and later used as hostages to trade for white prisoners and stolen livestock. But here, and you can read about this in the memoirs of the Comanches in Atokney's reading, the warriors decide to try and rescue their imprisoned relatives and also get their horses back. And so when the cavalry withdraws some miles after the battle, the warriors ride at night and they're not able to get the prisoners because they're too heavily guarded. But they stampede the horses and they not only get their own horses back, but they get some of the cavalry horses too. So this is the second instance where Mackenzie has a bad time keeping his horses. But this was a fairly conclusive battle, unlike Blanco Canyon, in that Maui afterwards surrendered and brought what was left of his population into Fort Sill to settle. Again, we look at the geography here. East of Amarillo, the North Fork of the Red River, Mupitai Hunabi, or Walnut River, as the Comanches called it, and its junction with McClellan Creek, which runs like this. And it's the same kind of foray up into a canyon and hitting the Indians where it really hurts. I think that these battles then before 1874 were prototypic and really explain a lot about the tactics and of both sides. The Red River War proper, though, is said to have been started as a response to an attack by Comanches and Kiowas and Cheyennes on the buffalo hunters at Adobe Walls in the Texas Panhandle on the Canadian River in June of 1874. This is called the Second Battle of Adobe Walls because Kit Carson had a fight with Indians in the same area about 10 years earlier. But this is the one that everybody knows about. Buffalo hunters set up a large compound. They were out of Dodge City, Kansas, and they were exterminating the buffaloes in the area. And this outraged the Indians. Their compound was like a fort with some outbuildings. They were awake at night because they were fixing the building. And so when the Indians started to attack, they were awake, and the Indians were repulsed on their initial attack. But then they hovered around on the outskirts for several days, making small attacks and trying to figure out how to vanquish the buffalo hunters. Now, this attack was planned by a medicine man, a minor medicine man called White Eagle, or Quenatosavit is White Eagle. That's him in his later years with his family. And it was led from a military standpoint by Quanah, the famous Quanah Parker. And White Eagle saw Coggia's comet in the sky and took that as an omen and told the combatants that they would be bulletproof when they attacked the buffalo hunters. And that was quickly proven in error. The buffalo hunters were fantastic shots. That's how they made their living. Bat Masterson was at Adobe Walls. Billy Dixon, a famous hunter and scout, well known for making a shot that his oral history says might have been a mile long to knock an Indian off his horse. Be an interesting exercise to have students look at the various accounts from Adobe Walls that have been published by different people that were inside the compound, talking about that shot and how long it was and who was hit and all of that. It's kind of a great example of variable oral history. But at any rate, it's sort of a legendary episode. And because of this firepower, the Indians eventually, after a few days, get discouraged and they start peeling off. And White Eagle is disgraced and renamed Isatai, which means coyote droppings. In the wake of the attack on Adobe Walls, the military decides to do an especially concerted plan of attack using columns, a columnar approach, 5 columns from all different directions. Cavalry, some infantry as well. Price from, I'll tell you all of the major players here. William Price of the 8th Cavalry from New Mexico. Ranald McKenzie coming up from Fort Concho with the 4th Cavalry. George Buell, 11th Infantry. Lieutenant Colonel John Davis, the 10th Davidson of the 10th Cavalry out of Fort Sill, and the leader of the whole enterprise, Nelson Miles, coming from Camp Supply in northwest Oklahoma with the 5th Infantry. This plan of attack was devised by General Sherman and General Sheridan, mainly Sherman. They're bringing into the Indian Wars their experience from the Civil War. And this is a very strong response. It's not a perfect strategy because the communication between these units is not perfect by any means, and their speed of travel can't really be coordinated. So they don't all really arrive at the critical place at the same time, but it's a pretty effective strategy. And if you study old Texas maps, you might know that Stephen Austin, way back in 1827, drew a map proposing to defeat the Indians of Central Texas using the exact same kind of surrounding column approach. It was never put in effect, but it shows how ruthless Austin was in his plans to deal with the Indians. So it's not a new idea, but it was quite effective. Nelson Miles, coming down from the northeast, the flamboyant infantry leader, engages the Battle of Red River, and which is below Palo Duro Canyon in Armstrong and Briscoe counties. In August of 1874, he encounters between 400 and 600 Cheyennes camped there. Miles writes that it's the most rugged country he's ever seen. His troops get bogged down. The Indians, in the usual fashion, the women and children escape up onto the high plains over the edges of the cliffs, and the Indian warriors take the high ground and shoot down on the cavalry, and they kind of get stalled there. But again, they do disrupt the camp and cause a lot of damage. Well, in making this foray, Miles gets way beyond his supply train. And when you're with infantry particularly, they need a lot of supplies that are brought along in wagons. So he sends back some 58 unloaded wagons under the command of Willis Lyman back toward Camp Supply to get more supplies for his troops. Lyman's wagon train is surrounded by hundreds of Indians and held at siege for 5 days. It's another heroic battle, a classic kind of circle the wagons scenario. 2 soldiers and 13 Indians are killed, again, relatively low casualties. And it would have been much more tragic had not a young scout named William Schmausley made a daring ride somehow through the Indian lines and got to Camp Supply, which sent a large force that came back and chased the Indians away. They just evaporated when they saw the rescuers coming. This is the site of the Lyman wagon train siege. And many of these battles, you can drive and see exactly where they took place. But I want to make a special plug here for a book called Battles of the Red River War by Brett Cruz. Brett is the Texas Historical Commission archaeologist. And in the 2000s, he assembled a large crew of archaeologists, and they went to all of the Red River War battlefields that they could get permission for, which is quite a number, and used metal detectors to plot the spent bullets and the shell casings of all the firearms used in those engagements and map it out. So here's his map of the Lyman wagon train siege. And often these reconstructions tell us a lot more than was ever known from the documentary sources about the exact position and tactics of the people fighting, the kind of armaments that they had, and so on. A lot of Cruz's work is available on the web, on Texas Beyond History website and so forth. So you don't need to find his book. It's been pretty well published, publicized, but I would look at some of these maps, it's really fascinating to see how archaeology supplements our other knowledge and at times revises our understanding of the battles. This technique, by the way, was pioneered at the Custer battle site up on the northern plains by archaeologists Douglas Scott and trying to think of the other fellow's name, Richard Fox, back in the early 1980s. Now, Miles was wondering what happened to his wagon train when it was surrounded, so he sent a small party of 6 soldiers and scouts to find out, and they got surrounded. In another famous battle known as the Buffalo Wallow fight, here's a Kiowa ledger drawing of the soldiers defending themselves from the hollow depression on the plains caused by where the buffaloes like to give themselves dust baths. And here's Frederick Remington's picture called The Last Stand. This particular painting is in the Museum of Fine Art in Houston, which has a tremendous collection of Red River War images. And they're all scanned, so you don't have to take the students there in person. They can do research right from the website. Mackenzie swings back into action, coming up from the south, skirmishing in Tule Canyon, which is just south of Palo Duro on September 25th. And then he reaches Palo Duro Canyon on September 28th of 1874, the largest and most dramatic of the canyons. And here he finds thousands of Indians camped, getting ready for winter under Iron Shirt, Southern Cheyennes, Ohomatai of the Comanches, and Mamanti of the Kiowas. Very large encampments. The soldiers peer over the edge of the canyon and find these encampments, and then they make their way down the steep slopes of the canyon, and they move up and they sweep up through the canyons, destroying everything in their path. The Indians, again, flee and leave their lodges. Almost everyone escapes to the head of the canyon, and then it gets up on the high plains. This is the famous Battle of Palo Duro Canyon. But Mackenzie is able to destroy all of their lodges, and he seizes 1,400 horses, over 1,100 of which he orders to be shot. He's not going to lose horses for a third time. He's learned his lesson. So the Indians are left without their horses and homes on the high plains as winter approaches. They called this era the wrinkled hand chase because it was such a wet and cold winter. And slowly but surely they trickle in small groups to Fort Sill and surrender. There are some holdups, or holdouts, I should say, and the fighting continues in small battles. One back at McClellan Creek in November, where Lieutenant Frank Baldwin comes across a large camp of Cheyennes under Graybeard, and he attacks the camp and rescues 2 young girls who are captives, Adelaide and Julia German. And the captive stories are a great opportunity to explore with students, the whole idea of cultures taking prisoners and exchanging prisoners, but also what was it like from an acculturation viewpoint for a young child to be taken away by the Indians. It's an interesting imagination exercise with students. Would they, for example, do they think they would want to return to non-Indian society after growing up for a few years and being adopted by an Indian group? So we don't have documentation on the German sisters, but there's an analogous story of a girl named Bianca Babb, B-A-B-B, which is, it's referenced in your recommended readings. She was about the same age as the German sisters and would be a great point of departure for exploring what it was like to be a captive during these times. Mackenzie issues an ultimatum in April of 1875 to the very last Indian holdouts under Quanah and Ishitai. They're somewhere along the southern edge of the, or the southern part of the eastern face of the Llano Estacado. They're still not coming into the reservation. Mackenzie sends J.J. Sturm, the post interpreter from Fort Sill, and Wild Horse, a Comanche chief who has surrendered and who probably knows where Quanah is. And he sends them on a several-week ride down along the face of the Llano Estacado. And after several weeks, they figure out where Quanah must be hiding. And here's a photo that we took some years ago, looking off the face of the escarpment, and there's a tiny hill. You can't see it very clearly here, but there's a hill there. That was their landmark. They turned west from that hill, and they came into this canyon, which was the Bull Creek Canyon. And that's where they found Quanah and all of the people that were holding out. Quanah agreed to surrender in May, and by the first week of June, his people were at Fort Sill and adjusting to the reservation. And that was officially the conclusion of the Red River War. And that should say 1875, not 1874. Quanah, as you know, went on to become a prominent leader on the reservation, a successful businessman, someone who had a foot in both worlds, but he acculturated quite successfully. And his story is well known, well documented, and a great way of exploring how someone could be such an ardent defender of their traditional culture, but then also transition and be a very effective and functional member of the new society that was forming once the war was over. So that's the overview of the conflict and the event.